Hello everyone, Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Beyond Two Souls. Now, the reason why we're going to be talking about Beyond Two Souls is because today, on September the 19th, it's important for me to say the date because I'm not exactly sure when this video is going to go up since the schedule is just pretty chaotic at the moment, all over the place. But we actually got to go and sit down at a press event where they showed us a little bit more about Beyond Two Souls, and they talked with us about some of the features, and then I actually got to talk with Guillaume de Fondamier. I'm really sorry if I'm butchering his name, which is definitely a possibility, but it is very hard for me to actually pronounce that, and I'm Portuguese, so I can't even imagine how American or English people actually go ahead and butcher that name, but we will see. Either way, I actually had a chance to do a little bit of research in regards to the game because they allowed me to do a one-on-one interview with Mr. Guillaume. And since they allowed me for that, obviously I did a ton of research on it. And I actually became quite interested in it, despite the fact that I haven't really played Heavy Rain previously. Now, the reason why I haven't played Heavy Rain previously, because it is interesting, he actually asked during his presentation when there was just like a ton of media people there, and we were actually in this movie theater, which is really cool because we got to experience some of the trailers as well as a little bit of gameplay in a movie theater. And I think that is definitely one of the most appropriate venues to show a game like this. But yeah, we got to watch some of that. And when he showed that during his presentation, he asked, "So how many of you guys played Heavy Rain?" And I didn't raise my hand. I think it was like me and maybe one more person didn't raise their hand, and I was like, holy crap, I'm gonna get singled out so hardcore. And then it was like, did I just say who played Heavy Rain or who didn't play Heavy Rain? Well, basically first he asked who played Heavy Rain. Everybody raised their hands, and then he asked who didn't play their Heavy Rain, and then I raised my hand, and someone else raised their hand as well. And he then asked why, but he continued his presentation. He didn't really give us a chance to answer. But I would have answered. It was because I was actually not really playing consoles by the time that Heavy Rain came out. Because Heavy Rain is actually a title that I'm really curious to experience. But as you guys know, I'm a one-man team, and I can't cover every single game, no matter how much I would like. But I have been making an effort to cover more in a ton of new different genres and stuff like that. So Beyond Two Souls was definitely something that I am interested in taking a look at, and interested in making a couple of videos about, just to tell the people about Beyond Two Souls. So what is Beyond Two Souls? Well, those of you who have played Heavy Rain should have somewhat of a loose concept of how Beyond Two Souls is going to play. Those of you who didn't, I'm going to try and tell you guys about how the game plays. However, I feel that just talking about it is really, I don't know. I don't think that talking about it is going to make the game justice. And the reason why I say this is because it strikes me, Beyond Two Souls, it strikes me as a game that has to actually be played for people to understand what the game is about. And the reason behind that is because if I sit here and try to tell you about the gameplay mechanics, which I will, I think that a lot of people are going to think, oh, that just looks like one big, massive QuickTime event. And I know that that is going to be the interpretation of a lot of people. But after seeing what I saw today, and after having a conversation with Mr. Guillaume, I have to say that I get a feeling that the game is so much more than that, despite the fact that if you're watching, like if you go onto YouTube and you watch a gameplay trailer right now, it definitely feels like kind of like a QuickTime event. It will. I can't say that it doesn't, because that's what I was watching last night, and that's kind of the way I felt. But after I watched what I watched today, it is a lot more than that. Even if a lot of you guys played Heavy Rain and you felt that that was what Heavy Rain is about, Beyond Two Souls is going to be very different. For starters, they've built an entirely new engine just to actually just to make this game, an engine specifically dedicated to Beyond Two Souls. And this engine actually tackles quite a lot of technical difficulties and achieves quite a lot of different things, particularly in terms of detail. Like, this game has detail like you guys cannot imagine. Like, I was watching this thing run because a lot of people were actually playing it. I personally didn't play it because I made the conscious choice not to play it. And the reason why I did that is because I don't want to spoil myself, since I already saw a lot of online material. And I noticed that the bits and pieces that people were playing was already like, it was just like this big, long ass sequence of the game. And I was like, man, I really don't want to spoil myself, because the more research I did onto the game, the more I was excited about actually playing it. So I made the conscious decision not to play it at the press event, but I still watched a couple of people playing it. And the reason why I watched is because it was impossible not to watch it. There was like 4 consoles right in front of me while I was waiting for my turn to do the interview, and I had to watch some of it. And it's like, you're looking at that game, and I was like, this doesn't even look like it's running on a PlayStation 3. I mean, I've seen a ton of stuff run on PlayStation 3, and I can usually tell when something is running on the console, but that game just looks like so ridiculously detailed that I don't even know. I don't even know how to put this. There's just so much detail in that game, and so much and when I say detail, I don't mean just like graphical detail. I mean like attention to detail. Like, there's actually a lot of things that you can do, at least it seems to me, a lot of things that you can do in the game that don't necessarily move the gameplay forward, but you can do those things simply because it kind of makes sense, if that makes any sense in what I'm talking about. Either way, Beyond Two Souls is going to be somewhat of a thriller game. It is going to be a very cinematic experience. Like I said, those of you who are aware of how Heavy Rain works will kind of know what to expect from Beyond Two Souls. However, like I said, there's also a lot of variance in terms of gameplay, and it is going to be a thriller, and their focus is on getting player emotion, on getting players attached to these characters that they've created in-game, and to get players to make different choices, because according to the choices that you make throughout the game, and these are choices that you might not even realize that you're making them, which I thought was really interesting. It's not like, for instance, there's other games that have choices. Like, let's look at Mass Effect, for instance. That's a game definitely has a lot of choices. Definitely has a lot of different not a lot of different outcomes, but it definitely has a lot of different things that can happen, and different ways to tackle different situations, which will lead to different paths that you take throughout the story, right? Same thing is going to happen in Beyond Two Souls. However, you're not going to be consciously aware of every little decision that you make, and those decisions might actually just lead you down a completely different path throughout the story, which I was just like, that sounds ridiculous. Because if you take into consideration that a lot of this game was, not a lot of it, all of this game was basically acted out by real actors in a motion capture studio, and all that stuff. I mean, you guys should be aware that there are famous actors that are actually working. Sorry, words. I'm having trouble expressing myself because I just woke up. I had to take a nap. I didn't get to sleep last night. But there are 2 major actors, which is Ellen Page, which are Ellen Page and William Dafoe, who actually worked on this game in terms of performing as actors towards the game. And the game is a very heavily cinematic experience. So when I tell you guys that there are different paths that everyone can take, you guys can imagine the amount of work that something like that does. And when I say different paths, I mean different paths. Like, we were listening to Mr. Guillaume's presentation, and he suddenly goes ahead and just drops this on us. Like, the game has over 20 different endings. 20 different endings for a cinematic-driven game. I thought that was pretty friggin' hardcore. As a matter of fact, I now regret the fact that I did not ask one of the questions, because I was hoping I could have asked this question during the interview, but I didn't have enough time. Because I actually also have an interview that I'm going to be putting on the channel that you guys are going to be able to see me interview Mr. Guillaume. But unfortunately, it was like a 5-minute interview because there were a ton of people that were in line to interview him, so they didn't have as much time for me as I would like. Okay, so the game is built on the key pillars of Heavy Rain. So once again, Heavy Rain is like something that just kept popping up during his presentation. And if you guys take into consideration that Heavy Rain takes place over 4 different characters in 4 different days, which I was not aware. Like I said, I'd never played Heavy Rain. This game is going to take place through 2 characters, which are Jody and Aiden. And Aiden is an entity, which is kind of bound to Jody. And Beyond Two Souls takes place with these 2 characters over the course of 15 years. Sounds like a lot? Yeah, it should sound like a lot because 15 years is quite a chunk of someone's life. And throughout these 15 years, you will actually experience different personalities of the main actress who is playing the role of Jodie Holmes, and you will actually be able to play out different versions of her. Like you get to play her as a child, you get to play her as a teenager, you get to play her as an adult, and all that stuff. And while you're playing with her, you're also dealing with the entity. And the entity itself has a particular type of gameplay that it adds to the game, which kind of builds on top of different puzzles, as well as does he even have a role in combat. He kind of has a role in combat because sometimes he kind of protects Jody against certain things. So it's definitely got some interesting mechanics in there. This story is actually not told in chronological order, which I was kind of surprised because, I mean, you'd think, well, if they're telling this story over the course of 15 years of someone's life, it would be cool to kind of basically start out as a child and then see her evolve all the way up into an adult. But he basically said that it was an artistic choice to tell this story over different bits and pieces of her life. So like you might be playing a portion of her life where you're a teenager or whatever, and then all of a sudden when you're done with that particular sequence, the game is going to take you to another portion of her life where she's either a child or an adult, and so forth. They also say that there's actually going to be a lot of different environments. I believe that Heavy Rain was mostly told like in the same city or something like that. Whereas in this game, you're actually going to be journeying all over the world. I mean, I've seen some footage yesterday as I was doing research for the interview. I've seen footage of her like in a desert. I've seen footage of her like on an American highway or something like that is also going through the desert, but a different desert. I've seen footage of her in the snow. I've seen footage of her as a homeless person. And the one footage that I saw of her as a homeless person, that was just like, it blew my mind, the level of detail that they went to and the kind of stuff that you could do if you so chose to go down different paths. Also, another feature that they have in regards to Beyond Two Souls that is something that was not as prevalent in Heavy Rain is that there's actually going to be more exploration in the game, which I thought, well, that's interesting because you guys know that I love exploring. But obviously it seems that Heavy Rain was a more narrative-driven piece, so to speak. You actually get to move the character around sceneries, and you get to do exploration, not only with the character itself, but if you play, if you choose to basically take control of the entity and you play as the entity itself, you also get to go and do all kinds of other crazy stuff. And even there's like different choices. Like one of the sequences that I saw, she was like going and robbing a supermarket, and you could use the entity. I say use loosely, but like you could control the entity and open the doors to the supermarket, and then you could just go inside, or you could actually turn off the alarm before going inside if you decided to wait before you go in. Basically, like I said, there's going to be a ton of choices, and those choices will have repercussions further on. Now, the concept that they say when it comes to player choice, they call this bending stories. And bending stories basically mean that depending on the choice that you make, that the story is going to bend and take a different form, so to speak, which will be your unique story. As a matter of fact, something that he said that happened during a lot of their play sessions is that there were people who would say, oh, the game feels so linear. I started here, I did this, and that, and the other, and then I finished my playthrough. Like the game was amazing, but it felt very, very linear. And they were like, okay. And then they put different people in the same room, and people start talking about their experience with the game. And this other person said, one of my favorite scenes was actually the bar scene. And so one of the other people that was saying the game was very linear, they were like, bar scene? There was a bar scene? And it's like, there, you definitely get to see just the kind of different experiences that people are going to be having based on their choices as they're playing through the game. And they don't even realize that they're making this choice, which I find very, very interesting. Like I said, these choices, people sometimes don't realize that they're making a choice. So these choices are actually very organic and very embedded into the gameplay itself while you're playing. Because, I mean, basically, if you take a look at the game's gameplay right now, a lot of the stuff that you will see is contextual menus will pop up as you are playing the game. Like one of the things that I remember from the gameplay that I watched yesterday is like you would be talking with people and you'd be able to be choosing the different types of dialogues that you wanted to interact with them, or you would be trying to beg in the streets and you can actually get up and then you can talk to this guy who basically makes you an indecent proposal to take you in the back alley, and he says that he's going to give you a lot of money. And obviously, I think we can all see where that is going. And then you can say yes or you can refuse. And it's like basically those are some of the gameplay aspects of it. The other gameplay aspects of it was also there was like a straight up fight scene. And I was not aware of how you actually controlled when I watched it last night. But we got a chance to talk. To talk today about that. I didn't talk about that specific thing in my interview because he answered it during his presentation. And since the interview was going to be so small, I decided to try and focus on other things that he didn't answer throughout the presentation. But it seems that the combat is going to be made by you swinging the sticks of the controller. And we're not just talking like, let's say, okay, there's this fighting sequence. You flick the stick left and right like once and that's it. No, I'm talking like these really in-depth fighting scenes where you're like trying to punch out an enemy by flicking the sticks of your controller, and depending on how successful you are, the fight might turn in your favor or in their favor, and you have to continue fighting. Like these were some really in-depth fighting sequences that I thought were really, really cool. Basically, the game kind of slows down when it's your turn to fight. Like your character will start going for a punch, and then the game will go into bullet time for a little bit and gives you a little bit of time for you to, like, let's say, flick the right stick from right to left, because let's say you're going to do like a right jab or something, and you have to flick the stick from right to left, and it gives you a little bit of time to do that. And if you're able to successfully do it, like your punch will actually carry a lot more impact. If you fail at doing it, like maybe either your opponent dodges, I was going to say or parries, but it's just like one of those Dark Souls thing. But whatever, he might be able to block your attack with his arm or whatever if you fail the movement. And then the fight will continue to organically develop. And this is for fighting sequences. The game is also going to feature shooting sequences. And however, when we asked him about the shooting, he said, look, there's going to be contextual controls, which will make sense at the time for the shooting, because it is not their intention for you to just basically start aiming at targeting reticule like Call of Duty and start shooting the crap out of people, because the game is not a shoot them up. The game is different. It's something a little bit different from that. Actually, a lot different from that, let's be honest. I'm still going through my notes here, so sorry if I make a little pauses every now and then. The choices that you make throughout the game might actually reflect somewhat your nature or your character, and it is something that they intend you to do is because the game is played out in chapters, right? Like I said, you get to play her as a teenager, a child, an adult, so forth, and throughout as you're playing the game, there's going to be different chapters that you can play through, and you can go back and replay through those chapters. However, their intention is that players actually play throughout the entire story once, because there's going to be consequences that are going to be basically changing the way that you play each portion of the story, and they want you to play through the game once and then experience the entire story like your version of the story in its entirety, because that is kind of like the whole point, like the whole thing about choice and consequence that I tell you guys that I enjoyed so much, which is one of the reasons why when I played Mass Effect 3, Garrus was dead for me because he died in Mass Effect 2, and that is a consequence. And a lot of people can't handle that stuff. But I think that this thing about choice and consequence is something that I really like in video games. Either way, let me just keep talking about. Let me just have a quick look at my notes again. They're going to be featuring throughout the game. They're going to be featuring themes like death, mourning, growing up, the consequences of your decision during your youth, as well as what happens after death. These are all things that they're going to be tackling throughout the game. These are the kind of thematic, not really thematic, but these are the kind of subjects that they want to tackle a lot throughout the game. This game is predominantly aimed at an adult audience, as I believe Heavy Rain was as well. So this might not necessarily be something that you want your children to play or something, because it is definitely going to be an adult experience. They're also going to include the making ofs of the game itself. They're going to include that in the game's Blu-ray, which is interesting because I would think that taking a peek behind the curtain for a game like this, depending on how you feel about it, it might actually, it might break the magic a little bit. That's my experience anyways. I mean, obviously I took a look at some of the making ofs because I wanted to see what kind of technology they were using. It was kind of cool watching Ellen Page basically chuck full of motion capture stuff. And as a matter of fact, I think that for actors to actually work in a title like this, it must be ridiculously hard, because when you're working in the movie industry, like let's say in Hollywood or something like that, they give you props, right? And by props, I mean they give you a phone when you're phoning someone. They give you a gun when you're supposed to shoot people. They give you props. And it was interesting watching both William and Ellen act, because all they really had was like these duct taped cardboard things that they were using. And I was like, holy crap. Because, I mean, you have to take into consideration when people are acting this kind of stuff out. Like, if there is nothing to act against, like there's no scenery, there's just like this big motion capture studio with cameras and whatnot. There are no props. There's like maybe ramps if they need to like make a specific scene that has a ramp on it. If they need to make a scene on top of the building, they'll like maybe construct a fort out of wood or something. And I remember seeing Ellen Page with this big duct tape square next to her ear, and I'm like, is that supposed to be a phone? God damn. But yeah. Also something that they want is for the game to be very intuitive, so that people barely even feel that they're playing a game. As a matter of fact, something that he said during his presentation just blew me away, which was the fact that there is no game over in this game. And when he said there's no game over in the game, I was like, so you never die? How does that work? And I actually saw some of the people that were playing, they just didn't do anything. Like, they would make choices when choices would come up, but like when those QuickTime events that I told you about popped up, they didn't do anything. So, and the game takes them on a different path than someone who is actually doing some of the QuickTime events and some of the fighting sequences. The game actually takes them down a different path. Now, obviously, that is going to lead to one of the endings, which might not be the best ending, I assume. But it is definitely interesting that you can never die, basically. The game just has no game over. It has no fail state. And he also said that this was the same thing in Heavy Rain. Heavy Rain also had no fail state. But obviously there's going to be consequences to you, like losing fighting sequences. And your story might be, I wouldn't say worse, but it's definitely going to be different. But that is a concept that I thought was very interesting, because, I mean, just imagine the number of variations. Like if you put these things down, like you try to make a tree, like, okay, so if I succeed in this fighting sequence, then I get to go to the bar scene. If I fail, I get to go to the hospital. And if I do minimum, maybe I'll just be knocked down in the street, and then I'll have to survive in the street or whatever. If you start thinking about this in terms of branching paths, it just like gets completely insane. They want this to be an intuitive experience. Like it's going to take people about 10 to 15 minutes to actually get acquainted with game mechanics and whatnot. And while he said something about the game having different difficulty levels, it is not their intention to actually challenge people. It is more something to be experienced. And I believe that I'm not exactly sure about this, but a lot of people apparently say that Mr. David Cage, who is one of the lead designers behind the game, is famously known for wanting to create emotion in people, which I found interesting. But yeah. So like I said, there's difficulty levels, but the objective is not really to challenge you, but just actually be accessible and have your own experience. And then they dropped something on me that I would never expect. Now, a friend of mine actually told me that he told me about that there was going to be co-op in the game. But when I was researching it last night, there's no data on that. Like I tried researching specifically for like Beyond Two Souls multiplayer, and apparently there's not a whole lot of stuff on that. And so today, when he actually goes on and shows us this, I was like, what? Multiplayer? But wait, it gets better. So let me try and focus into the multiplayer a little bit. I'm not going to go too in-depth into it because I actually asked them that specific question in my interview. So you guys will be able to see that interview whenever it goes up. It should go up not too long after this video so that you guys can see the two things in tandem, like one after the other. My thoughts on it as well as the interview. But when he showed us the multiplayer, the reason for multiplayer existing in this game is because a lot of people came to them when they were given feedback in regards to Heavy Rain, and people said, yeah, the game was amazing, had a lot of fun, and as a matter of fact, I played it with my wife, and it's like, it's kind of hard when someone tells you, yeah, I played this game that you've created, which is a single player game, and I've played it with my wife, or I've played it with a friend. And how this was actually working is basically the gamer of the household, like the person who actually played video games. Because sometimes in households, there's people, like for instance, there can be a couple, and usually the husband might be a gamer, and sometimes the wife is not a gamer, and sometimes it's the other way around. The wife is a gamer while the husband is not into games. And what happened was the gamer would actually be holding the control and controlling all the action and stuff like that in Heavy Rain, but as they were advancing through the game, since the game is a very cinematic sequence, I mean, it can be slowly experienced. There's not that need for you to have like super quick reflexes or something like that. And the other person who is not a gamer was basically telling him, no, don't do that. No, say this instead. You know, they were trying to participate by basically trying to guide the way that the person was playing. So it definitely seems like a more interesting experience because it's like you're watching a movie with someone, because in a lot of ways, playing this video game is going to be a lot like watching a movie, except that you get a lot of interaction while you're watching this movie. So it's like you're watching a movie with these two people, right? And one of the persons is and you're kind of discussing the way that you want the movie to progress. And I thought that was interesting. So basically, they thought it was interesting too, that that was the experience for a lot of people. And so what they did is they added this thing which they called the duo mode. So how is the duo mode? Well, basically, there's two characters in the game. Like I said, there's Aiden, and there's Jody. Sorry, like I said, my head is all messed up today. So there's not Aiden. I keep saying Aiden. It's actually called Aiden. It's pronounced Aiden, but it's typed as if it was Aiden, which is, it's weird. It's weird to wrap my mind around that. But either way, you control Jody and Aiden. And what you can do is if you go into duo mode, you can select like this person controls Aiden and this person controls Jody, right? So basically you can then switch control between both players, and both players get to play the game, as well as they can still like, you know, oh, let's say this or let's say that. They can still do that couch experience that they were doing previously with Heavy Rain, but now they also have a chance to both of them play different aspects of the game. And so basically you can do this by having two dual shocks. Obviously you can use one dual shock and then pass it off to the other person when you switch characters if you so desire. That's also another simple mechanic. But then he went a little bit more in depth to it, and he said that since a lot of these people that actually want to play the game with their spouses or their partners or whatever, uh, the other person sometimes might not really be a gamer, right? And so to a non-gamer, a lot of the times you hand them over a DualShock 3. And even certain gamers, you hand them a DualShock 3, and let's say they're more adept at PC gaming or something. And you hand them over a DualShock 3, and they'll be like, it's got so many buttons and knobs and things, and and they're a little bit intimidated by it, by that. I mean, I remember when I first started using a DualShock at a friend's house, and I was like, just put a fucking keyboard on that thing. But so, and for those people, what they actually did, and I thought that this was ridiculous, is they enabled those people to actually play the game through the use of an iDevice or an Android device, basically a smartphone. And you can use the touch interface on an Android or an iPhone to control the game. They developed an app which is apparently already available in, at least he said it was already available in the App Store and the Marketplace, which is called Beyond Touch. And you can use that. I don't know. Somehow it's going to sync up with your console, either through Bluetooth or whatever other means. And through the use of that application, you're going to be able to control what's happening in game by using a touch device. And this is very interesting because, I mean, when you're playing with a controller, you have full control of the characters. When you're playing with the touch device, they're obviously going to simplify those controls. So even someone who is, let's say, a non-gamer can actually play the game from start to finish using his iPhone, as opposed to using the normal means of controlling characters with your gamepad. Now, obviously, me myself, I want to play the game with the gamepad because I've since then grown accustomed to using the DualShock 3. But I was actually thinking this would be really interesting for me to play with my wife, where she could actually either play with the iPhone or another DualShock, and she could be either controlling Aiden or Jody, and I could be controlling the other character. And it seems like it would make for an interesting experience, especially because you would never expect a game like this to have co-op, so to speak. It's not really co-op in a way because you're kind of taking turns, but still, it's this duo mode that they've implemented in the game, and I was really fascinated when I saw it. I was very, very surprised. And this obviously is also going to bring the more casual audience. It's going to give them a way to experience the story if they don't necessarily know how to master one of these. Whatever. If they don't necessarily know how to work one of these, they might still be able to experience the game. Now, then at the very end, they said something which I was actually not that happy about, which is the game is apparently going to have like a special edition and Day 1 DLC. And you guys know that I give games a lot of crap when they put out Day 1 DLC, so I can't not give Beyond Two Souls a bit of a hard time on the fact that they're doing the whole Day 1 special edition DLC. I'm not sure if the DLC only comes on special editions or if it just comes if you pre-order the game or whatever. But either way, I mean, I just don't like that stuff. I'm sorry. It kind of pisses me off because at the end of the day, it's something that it is still Day 1 DLC. It is a portion of the story that some people are not going to be able to experience because they either can't afford it or they weren't able to pre-order the game or for whatever reason. It's something that is not going to be available to all the audience unless they shell out a couple of extra euros or dollars for it. So in that regards, it kind of took me away a little bit from the game. But I mean, it is one piece of DLC as opposed to a certain other title which people keep asking me to play, which it had 11 pieces of Day 1 DLC and microtransactions. And so I guess one piece of Day 1 DLC is not the end of the world, but I still can't help myself from mentioning that because I still feel that I hate when they start doing that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, when the game hasn't even released yet, and he was saying, oh, we're already working on this piece of DLC, and I was like, man, the presentation was so good up until this point. Why'd you have to go and say something like that now? Either way, that's all I can really remember from the presentation. So I hope this gives you guys a better idea of what Beyond Two Souls is about. Hope it kind of piques your interest to at least go and check some of the footage out. Let me know in the comment section below how you feel about this kind of game. Let me know if you played Heavy Rain, if you enjoyed playing through Heavy Rain, if that was something that you really enjoyed or not. Let me know if you're excited about Beyond Two Souls or not. And as per usual, thank you very much for watching. Comments, feedback, all the kinds of good stuff in the comment section below. And I will see you guys in the next one.